Everyone says they care about their health and want to eat better. But are you actually taking real steps to do something different about what's on your plate? If you're ready to gain confidence in your kitchen and learn about creating real plant based meals that are adaptable and approachable, go grab my online course, How to Eat More Plants. This step by step, go at your own pace course is full of video instruction from me. I've poured my heart into creating a series of videos that walks you through exactly how to put more plant diversity on your plate each and every day. The accompanying ebook is packed with all the recipes so you can recreate everything right in your own home. Head over to my Stand store to grab the course, plus get a free gift even if you aren't ready to start cooking yet. Links to follow me on Instagram and grab the course are here in the show notes. Stay planted, friends. Stay nourished. In this episode, I enjoyed an incredibly insightful conversation about lifespan versus health span. Have you ever considered the difference between the two, or how to increase how well you feel for the time you have instead of just how long your life is? Hey, friends, I'm Sarah, your host of What's on Your Plate podcast. My guest today, Hannah Van Ark, is sharing a wealth of knowledge from her days as a longevity researcher. The science behind how we feel is discussed in this episode, as well as how Hannah changed her mind about what she's putting on her own plate and how she's helping others do the same. Let's listen in. I'm here today with Hannah Van Ark. She is a plant forward nutritionist and she has been working on transforming people's metabolisms with plants, helping people nourish their bodies, simplifying weight loss, all from what she learned as a former longevity researcher. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here.
It's so exciting for me to have you on. For one thing, just anytime I get to talk to anyone like-minded in the plant-based realm, it's just always really exciting for me. But your input specifically in terms of how you even found yourself embracing a plant-forward lifestyle is really intriguing to me because most of us have our why in terms of, following this path. Maybe it's animal welfare. Maybe it is because of some health concerns or environmental, but you actually dug deep into research that brought you to your decisions and way of life. I would love for you to share more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, yeah, all of the things you just mentioned are reasons why people go plant-based. And I think that as somebody who's plant-based, predominantly plant-based now, all of those things have become important to me to some degree, right? Like, I think that once you get into this world, you realize how much good plant-based eating does. But I can say that for me, it definitely started more from the health standpoint than the environmental or the animal ethics standpoint, for sure. I was interested in learning what diet was going to be best for human health. And so, as an undergraduate, I got involved in research. At the time, it was like physiology and neuroscience research. It wasn't nutrition focused yet, but it was focusing on longevity and anti aging and living our longest, healthiest lives, primarily through looking at the impact of heart disease and how, if we can reduce heart disease risk, we can live longer and happier lives, essentially. So I got involved in that research, and I was a researcher for about 6 years, 4 years while I was a student, both an undergrad and a graduate student, and then 2 years professionally helping to run and manage studies, clinical research studies in an anti-aging lab. So that's kind of my brain in a nutshell, is like, I really do like the data. I like to have the facts. I like to see the scientific evidence. And I came into this research experience really married to the low carb lifestyle, actually. It was around 2010, and that was just kind of what was on the internet at the time. A lot of paleo, not quite keto yet. That came a little bit later. But I read it and it made a lot of sense. And so, just from a personal standpoint, I was early recently in college. I was trying to figure out how to feed myself. well, and it made a lot of sense to me. So I went into this whole research phase thinking like low carb is best, beans are toxic, fruit has too much sugar, all of that stuff. But I went into longevity research. And in longevity research, it becomes very, very clear very quickly that predominantly plant-based diets are the best for longevity and long-term health and what we call health span. So I'm not sure if maybe your audience is familiar with lifespan versus health span, but lifespan is just how long can you live. Health span is how long can you live and function well and independently and mostly free of disease. I'm really more interested, as are most people, in a long health span versus a long lifespan, right? And so when we started looking at what was impacting health span and what was helping people to live these long and healthy lives, it tended to be predominantly plant-based diets, which is actually how my research career ended up being a foray into nutrition because a lot of our interventions started to be nutrition related. So instead of just testing drugs for a pharmaceutical company, we started testing supplements like curcumin, which is found in turmeric, and other plant components that kind of got me more interested in nutrition from the professional side.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for giving us just a little backstory on, how you found yourself on this journey.
Sure.
I'm really interested in that health span versus lifespan type of thinking that you just spoke on. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people really look to medicine, healthcare, we'll call it, of the Western world to increase that lifespan, but it's not necessarily increasing that health span because it's just sort of covering up the things that could be potentially prevented or cured or treated with a more intentional diet or way of eating.
Mhm.
Um, why do you think we are just far from that mindset as a culture and society?
I think it really does have to do with a little bit of the way the healthcare system is set up in terms of their job is I found this when I was working in clinical because after research, I became a dietitian and I worked in a hospital for a while in the intensive care situation. Um, I phrase it like this. I feel like you can either put out a lot of little fires or you can stop the fires from starting in the first place, right? And so from what I saw in the healthcare system, it was oftentimes disease care. It was more caring for disease and not really focusing on prevention as much, although there are many amazing practitioners in the healthcare world who are passionate about prevention as well. And I don't want to belittle that at all, but I think as a system, sometimes it can kind of get lost in the wayside when we're just targeting very specific symptoms as opposed to targeting maybe the cause and the root cause of the symptoms to begin with. So when I was working in that world, it was sort of like, putting out a ton of little fires. And then I realized I wanted to get back to the prevention side, see if we could stop the fires from starting in the first place. But I think that's what it becomes when we're talking about just lifespan. I think we end up just like targeting tiny fires that keep somebody alive versus targeting the overall system to prevent all of these downstream negative consequences to let you ride that healthy health span for as long as you can. And that's a lot of what we can do with just very intentional, sometimes boring diet, eating pattern, lifestyle, that kind of stuff. And so it's it's not as like sexy sometimes or like interesting, but it is really important to be consistent throughout the lifespan. And eating more plants is the way that we know from a longevity perspective, it helps for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind when you share that is just the idea of how do you want to feel, not just right now, but for the rest of your life,
Right.
in terms of the daily choices that we make of what's on your plate or what you're doing with your wellness overall. Those easy buttons versus those reset buttons versus in terms of like choosing something that is maybe of a low vibrational type of energy
Hmm.
versus a high vibrational type of energy. The apple fritter versus the apple kind of thing,
Yeah.
the potato versus the potato chip.
Hmm.
How, making those choices occasionally, sparingly is not going to derail us completely in our health span, right?
Hmm.
But when you're
True.
making those decisions every day, it's affecting how you're going to feel longevity wise,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's, when we're talking about those sorts of foods that are probably, let's be honest, just more fun foods, not
Yeah.
stuff that we should be incorporating maybe on the daily or super frequently. There's nothing toxic about fun foods in small quantities. It always has to do with the dose and the frequency, right? So it's like there's nothing, I don't love it when people say like, oh, Oreos are toxic or something like that. No, they're not. If you ate nothing but Oreos, yeah, maybe that would be a little bit bad for your health, but we're talking about like, this frequency and consistency and amount at a time. And every once in a while, I really don't think it's a big deal, but I think the tricky thing is that every once in a while can then kind of give people permission in their minds to be like, oh, it's not bad. I can do this all the time and still have good health outcomes. And I also don't believe that that's true. So it is a little bit of a balance for sure. I think that flexibility can help some people stay on a healthier overall eating pattern, which is what a lot of my clients struggle with is the idea of cutting out a certain food for the rest of their lives, for example. And I always say, no, that's not necessary at all. We just need to adjust the frequency and quantity based on your goals. You're not never going to eat this food again. It's just a matter of, you know, what's going to serve you and what's going to serve your health in the way that you have articulated that you want that to happen, right? So, yeah, I agree. I think that choosing the whole food is obviously going to be the better option most of the time for health and longevity, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine how you work with your clients in terms of simplifying their weight loss. I mean, helping people get away from, grabbing that Oreo, let's say, or that chip every day.
Hmm.
Like it's just even just getting out of the habit of that. Sometimes it's not even what you actually feel like you want. It's just what's become your normal. So
Totally.
just that shift in your mindset
Hmm.
of what you should be grabbing for nourishment
Hmm.
versus what is something that is just maybe tasting good but isn't good for you.
Yeah,
It's
totally. Like
two different
interrupting that.
things.
Yes, absolutely. Like interrupting that pattern essentially, because basically, like habits, there's research that shows that there are actual grooves in our brain, right? These are neural connections that have been hardwired in and you can change them with different, you can change them with different choices, but it takes effort. Habits are what happen when you're not thinking. And so it's like basically the path of least resistance in a lot of ways. And the way that I frame, when my clients are interested in weight loss, the way that I frame it to them is that what we're really interested in and what we're really seeking is shifting your habits so that you feel physically and mentally well and your body arrives at its best weight. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're after, and that's going to be so different for every single person. And I know that there's diet culture in the world that has really made like weight loss and the number on the scale the focus. But I think that habits should be the focus, because that will lead you to your best weight eventually once we get the habits kind of on the track where you feel good, again, both physically and mentally, because there's a balance there too.
Yeah, and I think something you said in there was so important in regards to the best weight for you or the best weight for your body, because
Totally.
it is so different from person to person. And we get so stuck as a society in looking a certain way versus feeling a certain way.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
and I hear it from people too that have really reduced their weight to the point of like they're uncomfortable with how little they weigh. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
even about people that are overweight when you
Mm-hmm.
are also underweight, and it's not the right weight for your body on that end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
It is also true that that's not what feels good to you.
Totally. And I've been there before, like when I was in early college and trying to figure all this stuff out. I think it's worth saying like in my family, there's a lot of family members who weigh a lot less than me. And so I always kind of in the back of my mind was like, oh, am I like, is this the right weight for me? Should I be weighing less? And there was a period of time where just through some restriction and like the low carb kind of way, I was losing more weight than I should have, and that was comfortable for my body. Luckily, something in my head, haven't really talked about this before, but something in my head, like, flashed a danger light, like, pretty
Mm,
quickly on, like, I recognized that what I was doing was not sustainable, first of all. I, like, couldn't picture doing this for 2 years, if that makes sense, or
yeah.
more. And so I was like, I don't know." And then when I saw a certain number on the scale, I was like, "No, this doesn't feel right to me." Like, that doesn't feel like my best weight. And then when I was able to just, like, release that, and luckily pretty easily, I've done a lot of work around, like, body image and sort of things like that with clients, with myself since, but recognizing that my lowest weight was not my best weight was a huge deal for me, and it's a huge deal for my clients. Like, some clients just think about a certain weight that they may have been in high school when they weren't fully developed, or, at a different time in their life, and that may not be their best weight right now for a variety of reasons. Maybe they've had children or maybe they've had life changes where their best weight is going to be a little bit higher than it was before. And that's completely okay. We just need to focus on the best weight that's giving you energy, making you feel physically well and mentally well and confident. Like, we do want, that confidence where we can, like, accept and love our bodies. Like, that's really important as well. And that weight's going to be different for absolutely everyone. And it might not be the weight that you have in your head either. So it's complicated for sure.
Hannah, it really makes me excited that there's people like you out in the world doing this specific type of work where you are really looking at what is best for the individual person.
Mhm.
Because it is so different from individual to individual. And I would love it if you spoke a little bit more on how the relationship between how we think our physical bodies should be ties into things like mental health and how the longevity that we're talking about is intertwined. Because I feel like when you are trying to eat in a way or diet in a way that isn't sustainable, like you talked about, that
Mhm.
like boils over into your mental health and how you just move about the world. And I got to believe that that has a strain on overall longevity as well.
Yes, I'm sure it does, and I think that the chronic dieting has a really big and bad impact on longevity, so I'll definitely touch on that too. In terms of just, like, accepting your body's best weight and mental health, huge for my clients, for myself, for anybody who has been through that journey, just realizing that your body's best weight is what it is and it's individual to you and you're not supposed to compare it to anybody else. That's obviously just really, really great for mental health so that you can kind of relax around food and strive for your habits that make you feel your best, but without worrying if it's not exactly like somebody else's, right? The the mental health kind of concern that I see so much with diet culture is when people try to lose weight at any cost or lose weight quickly. This is another big no in my practice and in my view is losing weight quickly is usually a bad sign. No matter how it happens, it could be due to illness, it could be due to restriction, it could be due to a really crazy liquid fasting diet or something like that. We want to lose weight slowly, if at all. And that's just through habit change only. But when you're crash dieting and you lose weight quickly, and then that leads to feelings of restriction, and then that leads to physical need to actually binge on foods. That cycle is what we usually see create excess weight gain in the first place, where that cycle is just really tough on your hormones and it's going to make it harder to arrive at a body weight that's healthy for you. So that, all of that being said is recognizing that crash dieting and losing weight quickly is just not, ideal for mental health, obviously. The other thing and how this kind of ties into longevity a little bit is there's so much in terms of preserving certain functions of your organs that are important for later in life, predominantly skeletal muscle and bone mineral density. So these things are especially important for women. And these things are totally tanked and trashed when we're doing restrictive diets. And so when you lose weight too quickly or you're at too low of a body weight, you're not maintaining skeletal muscle and you're not maintaining your bone mineral density, which comes back to haunt you later in life when you're maybe in your late 40s, 50s, 60s. It can be easier to fracture your bones, which is one of the leading causes of death in older adults. It can be easier, it can be more difficult to maintain muscle as you age, because I can't remember the exact age range that it is, but it's something along the lines of you build muscle easily until maybe 35 or late 30s, and then it becomes pretty tough to build muscle in the same way just due to hormone shifts as we age. So it's one of those things that you want to bank on as much as you can. And then the name of the game is preservation at that point. Now, if you're spending so much time in this restriction cycle and you're not gaining, and you're not working on maintaining skeletal muscle by fueling yourself properly, and by doing some resistance training, things like that, but primarily by fueling yourself properly. When I see people lacking skeletal muscle, it's a lot of times because they're going through cycles of serious undereating, and that's a big problem. And you want to build that up so that you can maintain it over time. Otherwise, you may suffer from something called sarcopenia, which is the medical term for muscle loss with age. And so sarcopenia is a big deal. It's one of the biggest indicators of, mortality and morbidity in older adults, is like how much muscle mass they're losing as they age. So we definitely want to continue to maintain that. And the cycle of crash dieting is not helping either of those.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is if only we could know then what we know now, kind of thing.
Oh
Because when
yeah.
you're talking about like, the better foundation that you build and the more you set yourself up for this point in our lives where it is harder to, sustain, maintain muscle. I don't know about you, but myself, most of the women I was around in my late teens, early 20s, even into my early 30s, the mindset was very different, right? It was about physical appearance.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily about what you're doing to maintain your bone health or your muscle
Mm-hmm.
health. Like
Right.
nobody's
Yeah.
thinking about that at that point in
No,
time.
I
I
know.
mean, I would love to know that there's a shift in that as, we gain more information about plant-based longevity and maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
more prominent in people's minds moving forward. But it's like, how do we at this point, I'm 44,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know how at this point to address the damage that people like myself have probably done to ourselves, even
Right.
as
Yeah.
a long-term vegan.
Yes.
I've been plant-based for over 14 years, but
Mm-hmm.
prior to that, that wasn't the focus. I wasn't thinking about like, oh, what can I do for my bone health at 21 years old?
It
So
is hard.
when
I
you get to
know.
this point, and now you're looking back, it's like, and I know it's a debatable issue too, kind of side note here, like sunblock, like all the intense
Mhm.
tanning we all did as teenagers and young adults. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's not great at 40, 50, 60 years old.
Right, right.
So how do we address these things that we've already done damage to ourselves from and try to just hit that reset button?
Yeah, the one thing I like to encourage everybody who I talk to about longevity is that there is not a single year of your life where it's too late to make a positive impact. Not a single one. So I mean, when I was doing studies, we would have our very sweet 80, 90-year-old subjects who I would love working with. And through the interventions that we did, we would see improvements in the biomarkers that would impact their longevity. And so, like, even at that age, you can do things. I think that it's obviously dependent on the person. I think that recognizing the patterns that you may have had when you were younger and how that may have negatively impacted your potential longevity, and then targeting those sort of same things to build them up. So, for example, for somebody who may have had like a really restrictive diet or an eating disorder, for example, back in college, and they were too thin and they lost a lot of muscle and probably a lot of bone mineral density. Okay, so now our concerns are muscle and bone mineral density. What can we do to improve those now? We can eat enough calories, hugely important for both. We can focus on moderate protein. I'm not a fan of high protein for longevity purposes because there's a lot of research linking high protein diets to lower longevity. So I don't recommend high protein, but moderate protein when you're trying to rebuild skeletal muscle can be really helpful. And you want to focus on weight bearing exercise because that can help with your bone mineral density as well. And also, of course, taking the right supplements. You'd want to work with your doctor or a dietitian to determine which supplements would be best for you. But things that come to mind for me would be calcium and vitamin D to support bone health. But you don't always need to supplement with those things. So definitely check with a dietitian before you just like jump on that train. So
Yeah, well, it's reassuring that, it's not a total loss of
it's not,
the
it's not.
damage that we've caused. It's very encouraging for me, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, that you can just progress forward, even though maybe you haven't done the best for yourself
For sure.
previously.
And I mentioned earlier that I think that it was 35 or late 30s that it's easiest to build muscle before losing it over time. It's not impossible to build muscle in your 40s,
Mhm.
50s, and 60s. We see this all the time with people who start to work out and then they gain muscle. It's just a little harder, but you can still do it. Hormonally, it's a little harder, but you can absolutely still do it. So there's no point at which it's too late to do something great for your longevity, for sure.
I love that. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
In terms of changing your mindset and moving away from the habits of
Mhm.
things that we've always done, or patterns we've always followed, when we get down to it, like, what does it really take? What does it really take for somebody to just gain control of their future in this way, to change the path?
Yeah, I think first of all, you need to understand you need a roadmap, and without a goal, you don't know where you're going, right? So this is an issue that I run into a lot with longevity is that everybody says they want to live a long and healthy life, but it's so far in the future that nobody is like thinking that it's something they need to deal with right now. But
Yeah.
now is the time you have to deal with it. It's longevity and health span and living a long and healthy life are an accumulation of the habits that you have over your lifespan, not just when you sort of start to feel like you should be thinking about anti-aging,
Yeah.
So I think part of it is creating goals and focusing on the things that you really need to know in your heart are important for you. Because without goals, you don't have a roadmap to go anywhere. You don't know what steps you're going to take because you don't know what you're trying to get, right? So first of all, I think like being intentional about saying I want to improve my health span. And then from there you move backwards and you're like, "Hey, okay, what steps can I take and what steps do I need to take to do that?" Another thing that I find to be really useful, and this is a habit trick kind of, or a habit tactic. I don't know if you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talks about this. Okay, one of my favorite books. I kind of make it required reading for some of my clients because I think it's very useful in the way that it talks about habit formation.
Mhm.
He mentions something called an identity shift, which I think is so powerful. And what that means is that it's kind of fake it till you make it, but not really. It's basically embodying the person that you want to be even before you are that person. And it's a way of reframing for you to talk to yourself. So I can give you an example. Somebody who says, "Oh, I should go to the gym 3 times a week. I know I should go to the gym 3 times a week." You could say that, or you could say, "I'm the kind of person that takes care of myself, so I go to the gym 3 times a week." If you notice
Yeah.
the shift there, when you embody the person that you want to become, even if it feels a little fake at first, maybe you're not that person yet, but if you commit to reframing and talking to yourself in that way, I find it helps people a ton to shift their mindset and say, maybe I could be that person. And then maybe they do go to the gym 3 times and they're like, I am the person that goes to the gym 3 times a week. This has personally helped me a lot, in my journey in terms of changing my habits and things like that. Um, there's just certain things that I don't do. Not that I can't or not that I judge people who do. It's just I don't do them. That's just like not part of my identity. Like I'm not gonna order this meal from that restaurant. That's just not what I do, or I'm somebody who does take care of myself and I really value physical activity. And so I work out 5 times a week. That's just what I do. It's what I've done for like 10 years. And ever since I adopted that identity shift 10 years ago, my husband too, um, that's just what we do. It's not, oh, are you going to work out this week? It's, oh, when are you going to fit in your workout and when am I going to fit in my workout? It's become a total shift. So I think that identity shift can help a lot too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like that change of going from um, I should to I can to I
Mhm.
did type of thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then
To I
just,
will, maybe. So like
yeah,
I should, I can, I will, I did.
right.
Like
Yeah.
it's like that intention is so huge.
Yeah. And then even just envisioning, I think, is a really powerful tool well. Um, writing out, or at the very least, thinking out what your life is going to look like when that is what your truth is. Oh,
Mhm.
I am able to feel confident and sexy because I do go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, or whatever the thing is, not
Yep.
necessarily the gym, but whatever it is that you are wanting to do for yourself to make that mental shift, and then living as if that's already your truth.
Absolutely. And that's actually, so I have a course that I sell where it teaches my method for simplifying weight loss, finding your body's best weight with a plant forward lifestyle. And the first thing I have people do in that course is sit down and identify your why. And I walk them through a series of exercises where I'm like, what are your values? What do you value?
Yeah,
Where do you want? What's your vision for your life? And then in the end, it guides them to write out 2 or 3 sentences that are very powerful whys. And then when things get tough on the journey, those are always there to remind them what it is that they're actually after and what it is that they're measuring their success against and why they're doing this in the first place.
for sure. Do you find like it to be important to attach emotion to those whys? Like it can't be just I want to look good in this dress,
Not at
right?
all. No, it really can't. It's got to be it's got to come from inside. I think
Yeah,
that internal motivation is so much more powerful than external validation and the external motivators. So that's why I start out with what are your values? Like what do you value in your life? What do you want? Do you want ease? Do you want flexibility? Do you want power? Do you want feelings of self-possession? What are you craving and what are your values for this journey for you? And then from there, how do we get there? And how do we incorporate those very strong values and emotions into what it is we're voicing as our why? But it does have to connect. I completely agree.
for sure. It brings me to another thought that I want to ask you about in terms of the plant forward eating being a way to become less obsessed with food in
Oh yeah,
general.
right. Yeah, so I think that plant forward eating is a really great pattern of eating, not only because from the longevity standpoint, we do see from the research that 80 to 90% plant-based is the best for longevity long term. There's no firm research saying that 100% versus 90%. There's like a ton of difference there from the longevity perspective. We can guess that maybe going to 100% may have additional benefits, but it's just not quite fleshed out by the research at this point. But what incorporating a bit of flexibility does is it makes it more attainable for people, I think, to dip their toe into plant-based eating without feeling like they have to be overwhelm their lifestyle all at once, if that makes sense. It can be really helpful for people. Now, there's other people who do better with just a complete overnight life overhaul. And you hear people say, I went vegan overnight, I never looked back. That can work for some people. That doesn't work for a lot of the people that I've worked with. I think that I'm, I'm a little bit more reaching people who struggle with that overhaul or the implementation of that overhaul, or maybe it's just not the right fit for them. Maybe they struggled with some disordered eating or a lot of restriction in the past, and the idea of cutting out entire food groups is a little bit contradictory to their healing process. And maybe they need more flexibility while still wanting to take care of their health, for example, that kind of thing. So I think that the flexibility that like a plant forward lifestyle can provide is really great for a number of reasons. Including, that you can include maybe special cultural foods on special occasions that you wouldn't otherwise be able to still include in your lifestyle, even if you don't eat them all the time. And I truly do feel like everybody has a balance of animal products versus plant products that makes them feel their best. I'm pretty convinced that most people feel the best eating almost entirely plants. That's been my experience with my clients and the people that I've worked with myself, with my husband. you'll find people on the other side of the aisle too, I'm sure. You got the carnivore diet going around and stuff like that. But when it gets down to it, everybody does have that unique balance that's right for them. And so I like to help people find that for them while still honoring their health goals. Like we know what maybe their health goals are. Maybe they are concerned about their cholesterol, or, they're having this health condition. We still want to focus on that and address that, but while incorporating enough flexibility to make it feel sustainable for them.
For sure. I relate so much to what you said about just doing things a little bit more gradually
Mhm.
and being more flexible. I mean, that was absolutely the way I transitioned
Right.
from eating meat or other animal products into plant-based eating. And with the people that are a part of the group that I educate or influence in the kitchen, that's always like one of the first things I talk about is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I mean, for some
Mhm.
of us, it is all,
Yeah.
but if that's not where you're at yet,
Yeah.
or if it's not where you're ever going to be, it is still better in terms of less is more
Yeah.
from the standpoint of reducing animals on your plate.
That's
So,
100% how I feel about it too. And,
yeah.
circling back to what you first said when we started talking about how, of course, plant-based is better for health. We know this really, really, really well from the research. It's also better for the environment, and it's also better for animal welfare. And vegan, 100% plant-based is the best for all three, like 100%. Health, again, we're still 90% versus 100%. We're not quite sure if there's like a huge difference there. But from an animal welfare standpoint and from a environmental standpoint, vegan is obviously top notch and what is the best for those two things. So the closer you can get to that threshold, if those are your values, if that's what's most important to you, then that's a really good thing. But even by eating 90% of your calories from plants, which is kind of what I teach and how I teach people to eat for longevity, if that's sort of a balance that feels okay for them, you're still doing a huge reduction in terms of your impact on the environment by reducing the meat on your plate. You are also reducing animal suffering by eating fewer animals. You're also maybe able to afford higher quality animal products in terms of the way they were raised, or, that kind of thing, because of being able to afford better quality meat because of eating less meat in general. It's an economic impact too. It becomes much more affordable to eat good quality food because plant-based foods are so much cheaper, and you're not focusing on trying to eat grass-fed steaks twice a day. That would break the bank for anybody. And so when we talk about plant-based eating, there's so many benefits for it, and shifting to more plants is only going to increase all those benefits. I completely agree.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, plant-based eating in terms of being less expensive means actual plants, not the processed versions that are inflated at the grocery
Exactly.
stores. Like that's not the same thing, just to
That's so
clarify to
true.
our listeners.
No, for sure, for sure.
Um,
Like, and it's funny because ever since I've been plant-based, that stuff has not appealed to me in terms of like order. I don't like imitation cheeses. I don't like imitation meats or like things like that. I tend to go more towards the whole foods. Now, part of the argument is that I do still eat meat and I do still eat cheese. And so if I'd cut those things out, maybe I would be more inclined to like use those. I don't use them very much. And I'm just not interested in like the hyper processed like foods as much. Not that you can't use them to make meals more enjoyable, to balance things out, but the focus should be on whole plant foods. The focus should be on grains, beans, legumes, minimally processed, higher protein plant foods like tofu and tempeh, um, things like fruits and vegetables, obviously, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, so many amazing things, healthy fats. So there's a lot that you can eat, but it does get expensive if you're choosing highly processed sort of packaged foods. Just like any other highly processed packaged foods, they're just gonna cost more.
yeah, 100%. And I will for sure say that I am somebody that eats meat alternatives and cheese
Hmm.
alternatives, but I make them myself.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
I think that's a little bit different too,
So
making your
different.
own seitan or your
Hmm.
own cheese. I'm a big advocate for like being less dependent on the grocery store in
I love
general.
that. I think that's
Um,
great.
So I'm a believer in that you don't have to reduce those things that are, I guess, reminiscent or nostalgic
Or
or
tasty.
even tasty or comforting, right? I
Hmm.
mean, because there is that notion of food should be nourishing, but it can also be comforting and, oh,
Hmm.
that's just like my grandma used to make
Yeah.
kind of thing. Or so I do see the value in that, but I want it to be something I create in my own kitchen.
It's great if you can do that. It's probably not as hard as people think, you know.
No, it is
I've never
not.
done it myself from I mean, I make my own if I do use a plant-based meat alternative, I always make it myself.
Mhm.
Other than buying tofu at the store. But yeah, I haven't ventured into plant-based cheeses, but I hear it's not quite as hard as we think.
It is not just like anything, if it's unfamiliar, it seems hard.
Yeah,
And that's true for even just people transitioning from meat to plants on their plate, right? It's a
right.
misconception that people feel like, oh, it's so hard or it's not sustainable or I could
Hmm.
never do that. Like these are all the things that we hear.
Hmm.
But really, everybody can. And if you
Hmm.
just change that limiting belief, it
Yeah.
empowers you to know that it really is not difficult, but it's unknown, so people hesitate.
Of course, and there's always going to be that bias towards inaction when something is new, right? And so
Yes,
it is a difficult hurdle to overcome, but just like doing it anyways, and letting it kind of play out. I think people would find that it's not as difficult to cook plant-based or to kind of make your own things at home.
absolutely. And I think too, just reminding yourself that you deserve to be nourished. Like you
Hmm.
deserve what is best for you. And I think people get it confused with I deserve to indulge or I deserve the treat. But I like to say I deserve to indulge in my wellness.
Yeah.
And for me, that is a plant abundant whole food type of eating because
Hmm.
I deserve to feel amazing. And that's where
Yes.
that amazingness comes from.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's such a huge shift to view what constitutes indulgence and a treat. It's like what constitutes indulgence is like amazing, nourishing food. Once you can make that shift, it's really a cool thing. And that's like something that in later work with my clients, if we're really struggling with, temptations and going back to old patterns and things like that, I remind them of their why, and I'm like, "So you said this is what you really want, right? Like, wouldn't indulging be like to focus on giving yourself the best possible opportunity to get these things that you really want? Wouldn't that feel indulgent?" And they're like, "Yeah, it would," you know? And so it's like kind of that mental shift can be really important. I love that.
Yeah. Raising your standards
Raising your
to,
standards.
yeah,
Yeah.
to know that you deserve what is truly best for you.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can speak on um, the knowledge of when your body is craving something that is like high fat or salty
Mhm.
or super
Mhm.
sweet. Is that our body's way of telling us that we maybe need something specific that we're not getting? Um, can you share anything about
I
that?
can, yeah, and I think it's kind of mixed in terms of the severity and what we're talking about.
Mhm.
I used to work in a hospital and you would see people eating things like rocks or cornstarch. First thing I would, and that's called pica or pica. It's a medical condition. And first thing I would check for was zinc deficiency. Sometimes it can be the cause of it. And then other times their zinc was fine. And this was just some other concern or some other mental health issue or some learned behavior. Right. And so, like, it can seem like, oh, there must be a deficiency if they're eating rocks, right? But not always the case. Same with things like potato chips and salty and like that kind of thing. I think that to some extent, I've had clients be like very, very into the idea that whatever they're craving must be what their body needs. I don't think that that's 100% true. I think that cravings happen for a lot of different reasons, a lot of diverse reasons, including emotional reasons or nostalgia or boredom. Non-hunger eating happens for a lot of different reasons. Cravings can be a type of non-hunger eating, but at the same time, you shouldn't you shouldn't just discount like what you're craving. And in the sense of if you can find a whole food that is in alignment with your goals and your health goals that satisfies that craving, for sure, you should eat it to sort of see if that helps. But I do find that the idea that I'm craving a potato chip, so I must be low in electrolytes or, that kind of thing, I do find that that's a little bit less reliable in some cases. And so I do say be cautious with that kind of thing. But everybody knows their body the best, and I would never argue with anybody's personal experience at the same time. So if like you truly feel like that's something that you want to try and that helps to and of course to really test this we'd have to take your blood levels of certain things, right? So it's like we'd have to like basically say, okay, you're craving high fat foods all the time. Let's check out your essential lipids and let's make sure that all those look good. And maybe we see a deficiency and then maybe there was a cause, but it's sort of hard to peg without doing like a lot of blood work and testing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. For just the everyday person going about life though, who isn't able to like go to the lab on a
Yeah.
consistent basis to like test their blood work, what is some of the suggested ways to kind of gauge, are you getting what you need? Are you
I would say the only way to really gauge would be to look at the overall dietary pattern and see if there's any reason to believe that you would be deficient in those things that
Mhm.
you're craving. So for example, I had a client recently who felt that she might be low on electrolytes because she was craving salt. And so, but we'd been having her take an electrolyte beverage for, a few months or something like that. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, because it doesn't look like you would be that low on it because of what we're doing, that may not be the case. But if somebody has been avoiding fat like the plague because they've been on a resistant, on like a really restrictive diet and they're craving something fatty, in my mind, I'd be like, yeah, that probably is because you're craving some essential fatty acids that you're not getting regularly from your diet. So I'd say the only way to really assess whether a craving may be due to a vitamin, mineral, or electrolyte deficiency would have to be to do blood work and test or to assess the rest of the diet to see if there's any reason why we might believe that that might be the case.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for sure. Um, I think a lot of us gauge the way we feel or the way we think our bodies are responding
Mhm.
is by the numbers on the scale, or we see ourselves in the reflection of a mirror. I don't
Mhm.
think that those are accurate ways to gauge our wellness or just our health in general. And
No.
I love what you're doing to remove that type of thinking and just to give people something different to focus on in terms
Mhm.
of gauging themselves. For sure, the blood work, the scientific part of it is always going to be unquestionable.
Mhm.
Um, but so much too about just helping people focus less on um, just their weight, simplifying foods, getting more animals off their plate and putting more plants on it, I think is just absolutely the right path. And again, I'm just going to say, I'm so just thankful that there are people like you doing this important work to really dig deep into people's habits of eating and what they're feeding themselves so that they can have the reality of that health span that we all
Mhm.
want. Nobody wants to be, you know, struggling through illness and disease and not enjoying their life.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you live to be 80, 90 years old if you're
Right.
miserable that whole
Yeah.
time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, even though I work in technically part of my work is in the weight loss space, when people start working with me, they pretty quickly realize that I don't like to focus on the scale and they start to realize why. And it's because when people say that they want weight loss, really it's that they want something else. They want good health. They want to feel confident in their body. They want to know that they're eating in a way that's in alignment with their values and their habits are going to set them up for physical and mental success. That's what they want. The number on the scale, it really doesn't matter that much compared to all those things, right? And so I think that it's like important to have like that kind of voice in this space. And then I always promise my clients and my students who take my course that I would never sacrifice your long-term health for a short-term goal. And so there's nothing in what I teach that is going to be like good for weight loss but bad for longevity, if that makes sense. And so it's very important for me to have this very holistic program that also ties in longevity to be sure. Because, like, for example, there's like a lot of high protein diets going on in like um, the weight loss space or the muscle building space or the metabolism boosting space. And it's really contradictory to what we know about longevity is to really pound that much protein. And so it's something that I'm like speaking out against because I know it's not going to be good for the long term. So that's typically why my clients and students come to me, is because they can trust that I'm not going to be basically short-sighted in what they truly want for their health, which I'm sure, and they tell me, includes a long and healthy life, free of disease and living as long and as healthfully as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so
Yeah.
much. Hannah, is there anything that you would like to say about long-term longevity in terms of everything we've talked about, or maybe something we've missed? What would you like to have our listeners walking away thinking about?
Yeah, in terms of longevity, I mean, that we did talk about it, but just that the research is really clear that a predominantly plant-based diet is best for longevity, and there's a couple reasons for that. So it has to do with how much fiber is in a plant-based diet. Fiber only being found in whole plant foods, not found in animal foods at all, helps keep our gut microbiome really happy and healthy. And the gut microbiome has been tied to all sorts of chronic diseases, all everywhere. There's no chronic disease that hasn't been linked to gut health. So super important in that respect. Um, Naturally slightly lower in calorie density to help you easily maintain a healthy body weight while still eating a ton of food. So that's a really, really great thing about a predominantly plant-based diet that can help with longevity if the struggle is with excess weight. Thirdly, it's lower in protein in the sense of when you're eating all whole plant foods, it tends to be slightly lower than protein than if you're eating a ton of animal products. This is a great thing for longevity. So I think that we think of like we need to maximize protein and that should be the goal. This is not the goal when it comes to longevity. Moderate protein is good for everything. It's good for, longevity, it's good for brain health, it's good for muscle building, it's good for all of that stuff. And I want to dispel the myth that it needs to be high protein in order to be healthy because we know that high protein turns on some pro-aging pathways in the body. I won't get too technical with it. There's like a lot of names of these pathways that it kind of turns on that accelerate aging in the body. So we don't want to overdo protein. In a predominantly plant-based diet, does keep protein in check. So all of those reasons and probably many more, including phytochemicals and anti-inflammatory things and all of this stuff, are the reason why we should be eating a lot of plants for longevity. And I just want to have people take that away and also have people take away that it doesn't need to be 100%. It can be. It's a great way to go, but it doesn't have to be 100% for it to make a really big impact in your life.
I love that so much. And the just depth of knowledge that you have in this topic specifically is just so valuable. And just thank you for sharing so
Of
much of
course.
that. I know it's hard to squeeze it all in an
Yeah, it is
hour
hard,
space of
right?
a
Yeah.
podcast, but the gems that you left here and truth bombs that you scattered throughout this conversation, I just think are so incredibly valuable. And I think, if nothing else, it's going to just get people questioning more about what they're doing and what choices they're making every day.
Mhm.
And of course, people that are interested in diving deeper into learning more about their metabolism and simplifying weight loss, helping to really nourish themselves in a
Mhm.
way that is sustainable. For our listeners, absolutely reach out to Hannah. She is just invaluable in this space of knowledge and knowing. And I just love this conversation so much.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sarah. No, that's so nice. Yeah, if anybody is kind of at the space where they want to, revamp their health and do it in a way that is promoting longevity while finding your body's best weight, that's what I do. So please come reach out to me and I'm plant.forward.nutritionist on Instagram. And then you can find my website, theplantforwardnutritionist.com. And that's where I have my courses and my free trainings and lots of freebies too, if anybody wants to get started on learning how to live a more plant forward lifestyle.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And of course, always to stay connected to Hannah will be in the show notes for easy clicks and easy access to all the amazing things that are offered. So, Hannah, I appreciate you being part of this conversation and sharing this space with me today. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure. Thanks, Sarah.
So, I absolutely geeked out on this episode. This was such a fun conversation for me with Hannah. Some of the most powerful parts of this conversation were that interrupting habits that cause us to make unhealthy choices is 100% achievable. I think a lot of us feel like we are stuck in the bad choices that we've made and we can't quite get away from them. But just always remember that you can change your mind. You can choose something different. High protein diets are very contradictory when long life and health spans are the goal. I feel as though this is something that I have known for a long time. But, Hannah's affirming words and thoughts on this topic were just really well received. And I was just so glad that she said what she said about just moderate protein versus high protein being the best choice. Every single chronic disease starts in the gut. This is eye opening for me, you guys. Think about all the different types of chronic diseases and just all the different ways that they affect our lives. Taking a closer look at our gut health and what is actually on our plates is really necessary. I hope that you walk away from this conversation today with the knowledge that you can make a better choice that will change the length of your health and lifespan. You can make changes right now in what you eat in every meal that is put in front of you today. Stay connected with Hannah or work with her. Links to reach out are in the show notes. Don't forget to like, rate, and review this episode. Doing so helps keeps these conversations coming. We hope that you love what you heard here today. We hope that you are inspired and are motivated to make better choices for your own life and health span as you move forward. Until next time, friends.